If you had to live on foods from the Great Depression, how long do you think your family could make it? Nearly a century ago, more than 15 million people were out of work after the economic collapse, and many families learned to survive on potatoes, dried beans, stale bread, and canned meat. It sounds like distant history, but as food prices rise, grocery bills get heavier, and more families start doing the math on every item in their cart. Some of those nearly forgotten recipes suddenly have a reason to come back. A cake made without eggs, a pie made with little more than water, a pot of soup built from vegetable peels, bones, and potato broth, a single can of Spam turned into breakfast, lunch, and dinner. These aren't just 12 old recipes. They're 12 ways people once turned very little into hope on the dinner table. And the food in the number one spot may have you looking at your pantry a little differently today. Number 12, Wacky Cake. There's something strange about life during the Great Depression. Even when money ran out, kids still wanted birthday cake just like every other child. They still wanted to blow out candles, cut the first slice, and have one happy moment in a home where every penny had to be counted. The problem was that many mothers no longer had eggs, no milk, no butter. And yet people came up with a recipe that felt almost miraculous. They called it Wacky Cake. It was wacky because this chocolate cake didn't need the 3 ingredients most people assumed were essential. Instead, it used flour, sugar, cocoa powder, baking soda, vinegar, a little cooking oil, and water. The clever part was the method. People didn't need extra bowls or dishes. Right in the baking pan, they made 3 small wells in the dry ingredients, one for vinegar, one for oil, and one for vanilla if they had it. Then they added water, stirred gently, and put it in the oven. When baking soda meets vinegar, it creates the reaction that helps the cake rise without eggs. It was a small trick. But during hard times, a small trick like that could save an entire birthday. Life today isn't exactly like 1933, but more families are starting to recognize the feeling of checking prices before putting something in the cart. When eggs, butter, and milk all cost more than they used to, a recipe that needs none of them suddenly doesn't feel old-fashioned anymore. It feels practical. What makes this cake even more remarkable is that it isn't just inexpensive. It keeps well, too. Wrapped in a clean towel or stored in a container, it can stay soft for several days. It doesn't need frosting. A little powdered sugar, a spoonful of jam, or even a plain slice of chocolate cake is enough to make dessert feel special. And that's the real reason Wacky Cake has survived for so long. It isn't the fanciest cake. It isn't the prettiest cake. It represents something people have always tried to hold on to during hard times: a sense of normalcy. So if you start seeing more people searching for recipes without eggs, milk, or butter, don't assume it's just another internet baking trend. It may be a sign that family kitchens are starting to do the same kind of math they did during the Great Depression. And sometimes history doesn't come back with sirens and headlines. Sometimes it comes back in the smell of chocolate, a little vinegar, a little water, and hope rising inside an old baking pan. If there were no eggs, no milk, and no butter left in your kitchen, would you still bake a birthday cake for your child? Number 11, water pie. If someone told you they could make a pie using little more than water, you'd probably think they were joking. No milk, no eggs, no fruit, no cream, just water, sugar, flour, and a little butter or lard if there was any left in the house. But during the Great Depression, it wasn't a joke. It was dessert for a lot of families. Water pie didn't show up when the pantry was full. It showed up when a mother opened the cupboard and realized she no longer had enough ingredients to make a real pie. No apples for an apple pie, no lemons, no milk for a cream filling. no eggs to add richness. But she still wanted to put something sweet on the table after dinner. The recipe for water pie was almost unbelievable in its simplicity. A prepared pie crust, a filling made from water, sugar, flour, and a little butter. As it baked, the flour absorbed the liquid, the sugar melted, the butter added a touch of richness, and the mixture slowly thickened into a soft, custard-like filling. It sounds almost impossible, but that was the genius of a struggling kitchen. The goal wasn't to create an impressive dessert. The goal was to preserve the feeling that the meal still had an ending. A small slice of pie didn't make anyone richer, but it helped a family feel that life hadn't completely lost its sense of comfort and dignity. Many home cooks sprinkled cinnamon, nutmeg, or brown sugar over the top to give it the aroma of a more traditional pie. One important trick was letting the pie cool completely before slicing it. Cut it while it was hot and the filling could run. Let it cool, and it would set into something soft, sweet, and convincing enough to feel like a real dessert. Today, the recipe sounds almost like a folktale. But when food prices rise and every trip to the grocery store means putting a few items back on the shelf, recipes that use the fewest ingredients start making sense again. Water pie isn't the kind of dessert you make to impress the neighbors. It's the kind you make to get through months when every dollar matters. And if water pie ever starts showing up on more dinner tables again, the remarkable thing won't be how unusual the recipe is. The remarkable thing will be how many people finally understand why their grandparents had to make it. Can you believe a pie made mostly from water once put smiles on an entire family's faces after dinner? Number 10. Potato soup. In good times, potatoes are just a side dish. But when grocery bills start getting out of reach, they become the main course. That's why potatoes showed up in kitchens across the country throughout the Great Depression. When meat was too expensive, eggs had to be rationed, and milk wasn't always available, potatoes were still there. They didn't require special storage. They didn't spoil quickly. They didn't need a long list of ingredients. With nothing more than a knife, a pot, and a little time, a few potatoes could become dinner for an entire family. On a cold winter evening, a grandmother might start by slicing an onion and cooking it in a little leftover fat or butter. Within minutes, the gentle smell of onions would fill the small kitchen, mixing with the thin wisps of steam rising from the stove. Next came chunks of potatoes, water, a little salt, and some pepper, all left to simmer slowly. The magic was in the potatoes themselves. There was no need for heavy cream or expensive thickeners. The natural starch in the potatoes slowly blended into the broth, creating a soup that felt rich, hot, and filling, far more substantial than the ingredients in the pot would suggest. Frugal home cooks had another trick. They saved celery leaves, leftover carrot slices, or even a piece of stale bread to add to the soup. Not because they preferred it that way, because they understood that every ingredient had value and nothing should go to waste. A large pot of potato soup could feed 6 people, and if there were leftovers, it often tasted even better the next day after being reheated. Some families even mashed the remaining potatoes and turned them into a side dish for the next meal, using every last spoonful. Today, as the prices of meat, eggs, and many other foods continue to fluctuate, potatoes still serve the same role they did nearly a century ago. Affordable, filling, easy to pair with almost anything, and always comforting. Maybe that's why, during hard economic times, shopping carts tend to fill up with potatoes long before they fill up with beef or cheese. A potato doesn't promise luxury, but it can provide a hot pot of soup, the smell of onions drifting through the house, and the reassurance that everyone will still gather around the dinner table tonight. And during inflation, the most valuable meal isn't the most expensive one. It's the one that can feed the whole family for the least amount of money. Number 9. Leftover soup. There was a famous saying in many Depression-era kitchens: the trash can shouldn't eat better than the family. It sounds funny, but that simple rule helped millions of people get through some of the hardest years in American history. Back then, a bone wasn't thrown away after dinner. It was saved as a small investment for tomorrow. Carrot peels, celery leaves, leftover onions, potato cooking water, slightly wilted vegetables, and tiny bits of meat still clinging to a bone were all carefully set aside, because nobody knew what they'd be able to buy the next day. Once the container of leftovers filled up, dinner was ready to begin. Everything went into a large pot with water and was simmered slowly. The bones added natural flavor. The potato water carried starch that helped thicken the broth, and those small scraps of vegetables added flavor and nutrition without costing an extra penny. That's why many people called it the soup that never ends. A few carrot pieces today, some greens tomorrow, leftover meat the day after that. The flavor changed from one day to the next, but the purpose stayed the same: keep the kitchen warm and make sure everyone had something in their stomach. What's interesting is that this way of thinking now has a very modern name: zero waste. Chefs call it a circular kitchen, where every ingredient is used to its fullest potential. For our grandparents, it was simply how you lived when waste wasn't an option. Even people who prepare for long-term emergencies understand the same principle. During hard times, the greatest value doesn't come from buying more. It comes from using what you already have more wisely. Maybe that's why leftover soup was never really a meal about poverty. It was a meal about resourcefulness, because sometimes saving money isn't about buying less. It's about looking at a carrot peel, a soup bone, or a bowl of potato water and asking yourself, can I turn this into tomorrow night's dinner? Number 8. Rice and beans. If there was one investment Depression-era homemakers always trusted, it wasn't gold or stocks. It was a bag of dried beans. Because they understood a very simple principle: spend the least and get the most in return. A cheap bag of beans could feed an entire family through multiple meals. All it took was soaking them overnight, then adding them to a pot the next morning with water, onions, and a little salt, before letting them simmer slowly for hours. In many Southern households, a pot of beans would go on the stove early in the morning, while Mom washed clothes, cleaned the house, and let dinner cook itself throughout the day. Once the beans became tender, a serving alongside hot white rice was enough to provide a filling meal with plenty of energy and protein for the whole family. What's interesting is that this meal works a lot like compound interest. A small investment up front keeps creating more value over time. A single cup of dried beans expands several times its size once cooked. Add a little rice, and the value of the meal grows even more. If there happened to be a little salt pork, a ham bone, or some fried onions available, the entire pot suddenly became far more flavorful without costing much extra. That's also why rice and beans show up in so many cultures around the world. Not because they're poor people's food, because they're efficient. It's the meal of people who understand that a smart kitchen doesn't need more money. It needs to make every ingredient work harder. People who build long-term food reserves understand this principle too. Dried beans always earn a special place in the pantry because they store well, last a long time, and pair with almost any grain, vegetable, or seasoning left in the kitchen. There's a tip that many homemakers pass down through generations. Drain the soaking water and use fresh water for cooking. Then add a bay leaf or a little onion to help the beans cook evenly and develop a better flavor. A large pot can also be divided into smaller portions and stretched throughout the week. Rice and beans were never just a meal. They were a financial lesson served from an old cooking pot. Because during uncertain economic times, the investment with the best return isn't always sitting in a bank account. Sometimes it's sitting in a bag of dried beans and a sack of rice that can be turned into dozens of warm meals for the whole family. Number 7. Cornbread and pinto beans. If you wanted to hear the sound of a southern kitchen nearly a century ago, you wouldn't hear a blender or a microwave. You'd hear firewood crackling, a pot of beans quietly simmering all afternoon, and finally, the sound of a knife cutting through the crisp crust of a fresh pan of cornbread. That was the signal that dinner was ready. No steak, no roasted chicken, just a pot of hot pinto beans and a tray of golden cornbread. But for working families across the South during the Great Depression, that was enough to get them through another day. The pinto beans were soaked overnight, then slow cooked with onions, a little salt, and, if they were lucky, a small piece of salt pork or a ham bone that filled the kitchen with a rich aroma. Meanwhile, the cornbread was baked from cornmeal, water or milk, and whatever cooking fat happened to be left in the house, creating a crust that was crisp on the outside and soft inside. The best way to eat it was also the simplest. Break off a piece of warm cornbread, dip it into the thick bean broth, and let it soak up the natural flavor of the beans and the faint, smoky taste from the pot. A cheap meal suddenly felt far more satisfying. What's interesting is that dinner wasn't the end of the story. If there were leftovers, the cornbread would be sliced the next morning and fried in a little grease until golden and crisp, then served with the remaining beans or an egg. Nothing was wasted. And many people would argue it tasted even better the second day. When meat prices rise and grocery budgets get tighter, meals built around beans and cornmeal stop being old memories. They become practical again. They're inexpensive, filling, and capable of feeding a lot of people. Maybe that's why this meal has survived through generations. It wasn't created to impress anyone. It was created to fuel people who worked from sunrise until dark. And somewhere between the crackling firewood, the simmering beans, and the smell of fresh cornbread, people discovered that abundance doesn't always come from expensive food. Sometimes it comes from an old wooden table where everyone has a bowl of hot beans and a piece of cornbread to soak up every last drop. Number 6. Lentil soup. Just 1 pound of dried lentils can provide enough servings to feed a small family for nearly 2 days when paired with rice or bread. That's a remarkable return from something as simple as a handful of lentils. They don't have an irresistible aroma. They aren't brightly colored. In fact, many people walk right past them in the grocery store without giving them a second look. But if you look at the numbers instead of the packaging, lentils are almost like a meal-making machine. A single pound of dried lentils can produce multiple servings, enough to help feed a small family for about 2 days. What makes them even more useful is that, unlike many other beans, lentils don't need to be soaked overnight. Just rinse them, add them to a pot with water, onions, carrots, or whatever vegetables are left in the refrigerator, and simmer for about 30 to 40 minutes. That's enough to create a complete pot of soup. That's why many homemakers viewed lentils as a backup plan whenever the budget started getting tight. There's also a simple trick that improves the flavor. Add a few drops of vinegar or lemon juice after the soup is finished cooking, rather than at the beginning. The acid brightens the flavor, but adding it too early can make the lentils take longer to soften. What's most impressive is the nutrition. Lentils are packed with plant protein, rich in fiber, and incredibly filling. Pair them with a slice of bread or a bowl of rice, and you have a balanced meal that costs only a fraction of what many meat-based meals cost. Maybe that's why lentils quietly return whenever times get tough. No advertising, no hype. Nobody rushes home excited to show off a bag of lentils. But when people start counting every dollar in the grocery cart, they begin to recognize their real value. Lentil soup doesn't try to be the most exciting meal on the table. It does one job. It turns a small, inexpensive, shelf-stable ingredient into multiple hot meals that are nutritious, satisfying, and capable of helping a family get through uncertain economic times. Because during hard times, the real hero isn't the food you crave the most. It's the food that keeps you full the longest for the least amount of money. Number 5. Sloppy Joe sandwiches. There was a strange kind of math that many mothers mastered during the Great Depression. 1 pound of ground beef, plus a handful of oats, a few breadcrumbs. And somehow, it didn't become 4 servings. It became 8 hot sandwiches for a house full of hungry kids. It sounds more like a magic trick than a recipe. But that was the secret behind the Sloppy Joe. In large families, meat was no longer treated as the main part of the meal. It became the flavor. A small amount of ground beef was cooked with onions, tomato sauce, and seasonings until fragrant, then stretched with oats or breadcrumbs. Those inexpensive ingredients soaked up the rich sauce, making the filling thicker, larger, and still full of meaty flavor. Then came the best part. The kids lined up around the table with paper plates in their hands. One asked if there would be seconds. Another took a bite and immediately ended up with sauce smeared across their face. Meanwhile, Mom stood by the stove, spooning filling onto soft sandwich buns, while quietly counting to make sure every child got one. That was a Sloppy Joe. Not neat, not fancy, but fast, hot, affordable, and capable of keeping kids quiet for a few minutes, which on some days was worth more than the beef itself. There's a small trick many families still use today. After cooking, let the mixture sit for a few minutes before piling it onto the bread. The oats and breadcrumbs absorb more of the sauce, making the filling thicker, less messy, and surprisingly more substantial than it really is. That's also why Sloppy Joes became a familiar sight at schools, community gatherings, and large family dinners. One big skillet could produce a lot of servings at a cost far lower than giving everyone their own piece of meat. Sloppy Joes didn't just stretch a meal, they stretched a budget. And during hard times, sometimes a mother's greatest victory wasn't serving the perfect dinner. It was looking around the table, seeing a sandwich in every child's hand, and hearing nobody ask, "Is there anything else to eat tonight?" Number 4. Grilled cheese and tomato soup. Some meals can take you back in time before you even take a bite. All it takes is the sound of butter hitting a hot skillet, the sound of bread turning from soft to crisp, and the sight of cheese slowly melting between 2 slices of golden brown bread. A lot of older Americans still remember moments like that. A rainy afternoon, fogged up windows, a familiar song playing on the radio, a pot of tomato soup gently simmering on the stove, while a grilled cheese sandwich is carefully flipped in a cast iron pan so both sides come out perfectly crisp. It wasn't an expensive meal, but it was the kind of meal that made people feel safe. There was a ritual that almost everyone followed. You didn't eat it right away. You tore off a corner of the hot sandwich, slowly dipped it into the bowl of tomato soup, and waited a few seconds. The crispy crust softened. The melted cheese blended with the sweet tart flavor of the tomatoes. And suddenly, it became something difficult to describe. No longer just bread, no longer just soup, but a combination that made a simple meal feel far more complete. What's interesting is that this meal never required expensive ingredients. A can of tomato soup, a few slices of bread, and a little cheese were often enough to put dinner on the table. If there was leftover bread from the day before, even better. Once toasted, the inside stayed pleasantly chewy, while the outside became even crispier. That's also a trick many homemakers pass down. Bread that's a little older tends to hold together better when dipped into soup. During difficult times, this meal didn't become famous because it was cheap. It became famous because it felt comforting. A small table, a bowl of hot soup, a golden grilled cheese sandwich, and a family sitting a little closer together while the wind rattled outside. Maybe that's why grilled cheese and tomato soup was never just a meal. It's more like an old movie people return to whenever life feels a little too heavy. A reminder that happiness isn't always found in fancy dinners. Sometimes it's found in pulling apart a strand of melted cheese, dipping a sandwich into a bowl of bright red soup, and knowing you have a place to come home to. Number 3. Stuffed bell peppers from above. This is a beautiful meal. A red, yellow, or green bell pepper with the top neatly cut off like a small container. Inside is rice, ground meat, breadcrumbs, and a few seasonings, all blended together into something so colorful that it's hard to believe it was once considered a hardship-era meal. That was also the genius of homemakers back then. They didn't try to hide scarcity. They made it look abundant. A small amount of meat that wasn't enough for 4 people could be mixed with leftover rice from the night before. Breadcrumbs helped retain moisture and added volume. Then everything was stuffed into a bell pepper and baked. Suddenly, everyone at the table felt like they had their own complete meal. No one had to split a portion. No one had to give up their share. That's why some people call this America's first version of meal prep long before the term ever existed. Each pepper was like a ready-made lunchbox. Several could be baked at once, stored in the refrigerator, and reheated for lunch or dinner the next day. In fact, the flavor often became even better after the rice had absorbed the sauce and the pepper's natural sweetness. One tip passed down through generations was not to pack the filling too tightly. Leaving a little space allows steam to circulate, helping the rice stay tender and preventing the filling from drying out. Maybe the most beautiful thing about this dish isn't its color. It's the way it makes a small amount of food feel like enough. A single bell pepper proved that resourcefulness can sometimes be more valuable than a thick wallet. And during difficult economic times, the greatest skill in the kitchen isn't buying more. It's knowing how to make what you already have look like it was never in short supply. Number 2. Peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. There's an image that's almost impossible to separate from the childhood of millions of Americans. A metal lunchbox sitting on the kitchen table. Beside it is a mother who woke up early, spreading peanut butter onto slices of bread, adding a layer of sweet jelly, then gently pressing the sandwich together before wrapping it in a white paper napkin. No heating required. No refrigeration needed for a few hours. By lunchtime, the sandwich was still soft, still flavorful, and still enough to satisfy a child who had spent the entire morning running around. Maybe that's why this simple meal helped raise an entire generation. Peanut butter was never a luxury ingredient. It stores well, is packed with protein and healthy fats, and even a small amount can keep someone full for a long time. Paired with fruit jelly, the salty and sweet flavors balance each other in a way that's simple but unforgettable. What's interesting is that many kids don't remember what kind of jelly was in the sandwich. They remember the sound of the lunchbox latch clicking open. They remember the smell of the sandwich when they unwrapped it. They remember trading half of it for a few cookies from the kid sitting next to them. It wasn't just lunch. It was part of childhood. Even during difficult economic times, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches kept showing up because they didn't cost much and still provided enough energy to get through the school day. Many families also kept extra jars of peanut butter in the pantry because it stored well and was always ready for those days when nobody had made it to the grocery store yet. There was also a small trick many mothers passed down. They spread peanut butter on both slices of bread before adding the jelly in the middle. The peanut butter acted like a thin barrier, keeping the jelly from soaking into the bread and helping the sandwich stay fresh until lunchtime. Maybe that's why a peanut butter and jelly sandwich was never just a meal. It was an unspoken message, a reminder that no matter how much life changed outside the house, there was always a lunchbox packed with care, and there was always someone who wanted you to head off to school or work with a full stomach and enough energy to start the day. Number 1. Spam. Spam didn't become a legend because it tasted the best. It became a legend because when the world was facing war, economic hardship, and shortages, that little can was still sitting on the shelf, ready whenever it was needed. No refrigerator required, no complicated cooking, no special storage. Just a can opener, a hot skillet, and a few minutes, and you had protein, fat, salt, and enough energy for a meal. That's why during World War II, Spam wasn't just found in family kitchens. It followed soldiers, factory workers, and communities living through food rationing. It wasn't a food of luxury. It was a food of certainty. And during a crisis, certainty can be more valuable than flavor. A thick slice of Spam placed in a hot skillet begins to brown around the edges within minutes. The rich, savory aroma fills the kitchen almost immediately. Serve it with eggs for breakfast. Put it between 2 slices of bread for lunch. Dice it up and mix it with rice for dinner. The same can of meat can stretch across multiple meals without requiring many additional ingredients. A single can of Spam might appear with eggs in the morning, in a sandwich at noon, and alongside rice in the evening, turning one ingredient into several different meals. Today, plenty of people might laugh when they see a can of Spam sitting in a pantry, but those who have lived through lean times understand its value immediately. A food that lasts for years, is ready to use the moment it's opened, provides plenty of calories, and pairs well with almost anything, will always have a place in a well-prepared kitchen. Maybe that's why Spam deserves the number 1 spot. Not because it tastes better than everything else, but because it represents a very real lesson. In good times, we choose food based on what we like. In hard times, people choose what can help their families make it through tomorrow. And sometimes, peace of mind isn't found in a fancy dinner. It's found in a small metal can, quietly waiting until the day it's needed. The foods on today's list were never created to become legends. They were created to help ordinary families get through difficult times with resourcefulness, patience, and hope. A bag of beans, a few potatoes, a can of Spam, or a jar of peanut butter once helped raise an entire generation when so many other things had become luxuries. Maybe the biggest lesson isn't that we'll soon be eating these foods again. It's that they remind us to appreciate what we have, waste less, and prepare with calm thinking instead of panic. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you could choose just one item from today's list to always keep in your kitchen, which one would it be? Let us know in the comments below.